Welcome, everyone, to another edition of SCRC's Let's Talk Caregiving. I'm your host, Roberto Velasquez, President and CEO of Southern Caregiver Resource Center. And I'm here, as always, with my co-host, Martha Rayon, our Executive Vice President. Hi, Martha.
Hey, Roberto.
Today, we have a very special guest. His name is Russell Zygmunt. Russell is a licensed clinical social worker and the Director of Clinical Services for Southern Caregiver Resource Center. Russell is also the clinical supervisor for many of our family consultants working towards their licensure under the Board of Behavioral Sciences for the state of California. He also serves as a field instructor for master's level students through San Diego State University and USC. And in addition, Russell was a family consultant prior to becoming the clinical supervisor at Southern Caregiver Resource Center, and actually has been with the agency now for 8 years. Welcome, Russell. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to an opportunity to speak with both of you.
I'm excited that Russell's here, Martha, because today's topic, I want to really kind of focus on the male caregiver. You know, we talk so much about caregiving, and we talk so much about, because data and statistics show in our experience are mostly women who are family caregivers. But you know, male caregivers, the numbers are smaller from percentage wise, but the role of the male caregiver is just as impactful and in-depth as women caregivers.
Absolutely. I am also really excited to have Russell here because I know that in his line of work, I'm sure he comes across a lot of male caregivers, and they all have a very unique experience. I was thinking when we were going to do this podcast about a couple of the male caregivers I have encountered, and some of them, I think, have very unique situations where they're caring for multiple individuals. But I think that overall, their biggest challenge is when it comes to the personal care of the person they're caring for. So I wanted to hear from Russell. What are some of the challenges? What are some of the concerns that male caregivers have shared when it comes to this type of care, you know, the personal care of those individuals?
Yes, that's definitely one of the biggest challenges, especially when it's a parent, I think, that's not necessarily the type of thing that a male might have ever expected to be doing for a parent. Not that anyone necessarily is, but with male caregivers in particular, there's often something we might call a role strain or an identity shift that happens when they become a caregiver, where they kind of traditional societal norms don't have men in that role, and then they're stepping into that role, and maybe they are the only person who's available, or it's not something they were planning on doing. So it's kind of a shift in identity to be someone who's caring, especially for a parent, as opposed to just working and doing all the normal male role things that you were used to doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that, because I do know that even research shows that a lot of male caregivers state that they're uncomfortable with the kind of hands-on care or direct care for family members, especially like you said, they're taking care of either their elderly wife or their mom, their mother, and some of them actually have had little experience as caregivers with their own children. So it makes it even more uncomfortable now doing that kind of a task because they have not as much experience.
I remember a particular caregiver a while ago. He was talking about caring for his mother. And when it came to bath time, it was such a struggle because she had Alzheimer's. And so she was very disoriented many times when it came to bath time. And then he was very hesitant to do this type of activity, and he didn't have anybody else. So he was adding so much stress to this activity, and to the point that he really was kind of breaking down. What do you suggest that caregivers do when they're kind of in this situation, Russell?
Yes, that's a good example. And it reminds me, working with male clients, I've also noticed it's not infrequent that they might obtain a physical injury because there's almost a pressure and expectation that because they're a man, they're strong, they're able to do these things by themselves, whereas women may be in some cases more likely to ask for help. So a big part of it is destigmatizing asking for help and bringing someone in professionally to maybe help with caregiving, and or bathing or some of those things that do require lifting. And even if it's weight that maybe someone could lift, it's an awkward way to do it, and people do get injured. um, of course, there are also classes and trainings, even webinars on ways to lift someone or move someone without injury.
Yes, and I know one of the things that is a consistent problem is that men often, like you said, the male role model, they can lift, they can do things, and then they don't ask for help. They are less likely to open up when they're feeling stressed as well. So these it's not just the physical part of the caregiving labor, but it's also the emotional stress that builds up, and they're less likely again to ask for support. And that's why programming that is developed for male caregivers is very, very important, where it's kind of more peer support type of programs where they see other males and they don't feel like they're the only person in an all-female group of participants or people in classrooms.
Russell, you made a very good point earlier when you were talking about society and really normalizing the fact that caregivers can also be male. And of course, often are, and we have a lot of clients who are male. And I was thinking about another caregiver. He was sharing with me, and very emotional when he was doing this, sharing with me that his wife was having lapses in memory and really very disoriented sometimes. And she hadn't been diagnosed, but obviously there was some memory loss in within her. And he was really concerned because he didn't know how to care for her. And so I was trying to tell him, we have all these wonderful services, maybe like you were talking about, get someone to come in and help with those activities. And he was just so reluctant. He was not welcoming the opportunity to have someone help him. And so I wanted to see if you can talk a little bit about, if we see this, how do we encourage people to really ask for help? Or how should we recognize within ourselves that maybe it's time to ask someone to help us?
Yes, I think you're both been speaking to the kind of societal norms and stigmas around asking for help. That men often do have trouble with that, especially if they're having a hard time emotionally with it. That might be something they're just less likely to want to talk about. So, with male caregivers, we generally want to start to destigmatize and normalize the male caregiver experience. And a big part of that is encouraging to attend support groups. There are male specific support groups out there. A lot of our groups also do have men as well as women. So definitely sharing those stories. I think when in general, if you know someone who is a male caregiver, if you have an example in your family or that you know about of somebody that's gone through that as a male and maybe the struggles they had as well as the things that helped them, I think it's always helpful to share personal stories, while just offering a non-judgmental space to ask them, what is it like for you? I imagine that's very difficult. How is it going? And just kind of opening that conversation up in a non-judgmental way.
Yeah, I remember a few years back, and I'm sure you remember too, Martha, here at Southern Caregiver Resource Center, we partnered with iHeartRadio and Kogo, and
Mhm.
we ran some I guess like public service announcements or advertisement
Yes.
about caregiving. And it was run during the morning drives. This is, of course, pre-COVID when everybody did drive to work. Now, so many people are working remotely even post-COVID. But it was during the morning drive with Ted Garcia. Remember those?
Yes.
And what was really interesting, because it was Ted Garcia, morning drive, we didn't really know what was going to happen with people calling our agency for services, but the vast majority of the callers were male caregivers who were seeking support.
I think it kind of goes along with if you're in a group of men who might be experiencing similar situations, then there's more of a, I guess, comfort in saying, oh, okay, well, me too. Maybe I can ask for help. Maybe we can ask for help together. But I do think that it takes that network. If you happen to have a really good, close group of male friends, you might be more likely to ask for help. But now what happens if in caregiving, like it often does, we are isolated as caregivers? There is that big responsibility of taking care of that individual. So then how do you break through that to ask for help if your group is not someone that you can turn to?
I think with that, Martha, and Russ, please jump in, from your experience as a family consultant. But I know that, like, for example, when my father-in-law was caring for my mother-in-law and she had Alzheimer's, um, every time I would ask him, "How are you doing?" he would say, "Oh, I'm fine. I'm doing this for her and I'm doing this and she can't get up and now she's falling and, wandering and she's agitated all the time." And then I would hear him and then I'd say, "No, how are you doing?" "Oh, I'm fine. I'm good. My health is great, blah, blah, blah." But after a while of talking with him, you could see in his face and in his eyes his true exhaustion. And sometimes he would even, his eyes would get all watery and well up with tears, even though he would hold them back. So I think one of the things that we should do as people who are maybe not involved in the direct care of a loved one, but we know our parent is or somebody else is ask them, "How are you doing?" And make sure that they are connecting to agencies or programs, especially to Southern Caregiver Resource Center, where we can just help them throughout their whole caregiver journey. Because we have to be aware and alert and tell them that, hey, I know you're okay, but here's a great agency that might be able to help you.
Yes, and something we do find, I was talking to some staff, the current family consultants, about this topic and just preparing, and that a lot of the time male caregivers will come in just looking for some resources, some respite care, which is that in and of itself can be difficult to ask for. But then we do get to some questions about how they're doing, and there may be reluctance to talk about that, but when people are able to open up, sometimes they then end up getting that referral to our short-term counseling program and end up dealing with some of these feelings like anger, depression are both very common feelings that come up in a caregiving situation, and just having the space to really talk to somebody, especially a professional who knows about it. If you don't have necessarily a close friend who has dealt with this type of thing, can make a big difference in just processing and coming to some sort of peace with those feelings, and thereby allowing you to be a better caregiver.
I guess in seeing yourself reflected in other male caregivers is what would help them to seek assistance and to really connect and get that support. It seems like we're doing it here, but maybe there needs to be a shift in our society, because on the opposite side of that, there's a lot that falls on the shoulders of women, because there is that expectation that, hey, you're the daughter, so then you have to take care of, let's say, the mom. And whereas the son doesn't have to be and is absolved of that responsibility. And so I think there is a shift that we all need to make, and maybe allow both to somehow share in that responsibility. And that way the male caregiver feels better asking for help, but also the female caregiver feels like she can share the responsibility with someone else and doesn't have to take it all upon herself.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think a good way to start is, again, connecting with Southern Caregiver Resource Center, because one of the things that our family consultants do incredibly well is assess the caregiver's needs. And in part of the assessment, they help develop a caregiver plan or a plan of action. And often it could even include teaching the caregiver how to hold like a family meeting and kind of identify what are the areas where they need help in with their other siblings or brother or other family members, or even extended friends as well, extended family as like friends. And this is really important. I know that that was incredibly important when we were, my family, we were providing care for my mother, who didn't have dementia, but she had cancer, and it was a very quick cancer. And towards about the last, I don't know, 30, 40 days of her life was bedbound and required a lot of help and support. And those family meetings allowed us to help identify from all five of us. There's three males and three females in our family. I have two other brothers and two sisters. So there's five of us, but it helped us identify where we can serve, where we can help. We made it into a space where it was also free to talk about, I'm not comfortable doing that. And if you're not comfortable, then what other options are there? Could you bring in some assistance while it's your turn to be there with mom? Those kinds of things.
I'm curious, Russell, when a male caregiver comes through our doors, what would be the first step for them to get to the point that they can start feeling good about asking for help? What is the first step for a male caregiver?
Well, if they're calling in, we're collecting some of their information at intake. And, as I used to be for a while, the only male family consultant here. So occasionally I would get a client that was requesting a male family consultant. And fortunately, we do still have a male family consultant. So, um, males in this field are actually, as a profession, are the minority as well. But we found a few over the years. So sometimes people do request that as well. But it really just starts with calling in and just wanting to talk to somebody, recognizing that there are probably some resources out there you don't know about or can learn more about how they might help you, whether it's our respite programs, support groups, counseling, psychoeducational classes, other things. So once they are connected, they'll have that one-on-one with one of our family consultants who can, spend an hour or 2 hours if the caregiver is kind of asking for that amount of time, to really figure out what's going to be most helpful in their specific situation.
That's wonderful. And I'm glad that we do have the ability to connect with caregivers. Sometimes talking to another male makes you feel more comfortable in that situation. So, to the people who are listening, Russ, what would encourage them? What would you suggest to encourage them to connect to services? Because I have tried, when I talk to caregivers in the field, to say, hey, we're here for you. Oh, no, I don't need that right now. When they clearly need that, when they are clearly distraught because of the situation, they don't know how to manage, but are so reluctant to do so. How would you encourage them to connect?
Well, I think it goes with a big theme of this topic we've been talking about, which is just normalizing the caregiving experience, and that males can be caregivers as well. And a certain percentage, it varies in what I've read, from 25 to 40% are male. But that there are male caregivers who have their own unique challenges and need their type of support, as well as, in general, I think we all know caregiving has its own stigma and difficulty asking for help. So it's really just noting there's so many people out there that are caregivers. There's so many caregivers in general that, even if it's a minority are male, it's still a lot of them. We certainly have a lot of them connected with our organization. So just getting connected, whether it's, you can start by just talking about practical resources if you're not really wanting to get into a support group or anything. It never hurts to talk to somebody, a professional, about what might be helpful to you in your situation.
I'm thinking about something that we always say, that, asking for help is not a sign of weakness, but a sign of strength.
Yes.
Recognizing that I can't do it alone, that I have limitations, that I don't even know where to begin is okay, because we all, as caregivers, have the same questions. So don't be afraid to ask for help. We are here for you.
Well, that's all the time we have left for this edition of Let's Talk Caregiving. To hear more of our podcasts, follow us on your favorite podcasting platforms or visit our website at scrc.care. I want to thank Martha for co-hosting another important discussion, our guest Russell Zygmunt, and our audience for tuning in. And as Martha said earlier, if you're providing support to a loved one, you don't have to do this alone. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. To connect to our programs and services, visit our website at scrc.care or call us at 1-800-827-1008. If you live outside of San Diego and Imperial counties, visit caregivercalifornia.org to find the Caregiver Resource Center nearest you. To support our efforts and make a tax-deductible donation, please go to scrc.care and click on the Donate tab. And remember, SCRC is here for you,
Caring for those who care for others.